Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. We've got a special guest, Mr. Matt Tesauro here and originally I was going to introduce you as from OWASP. I didn't realize that you had from, and there were like all these titles that we're going to follow. So I'll just save that for you. So yeah, do you want to give us a quick intro and then, we'll go into what we're going to talk about today, which by the way is, web app security, since that's what Matt and I have been doing for the last 20 years together.
Yeah, it's been a while. OWASP is probably the most recent of things. I just got reelected onto the board of directors the global board of directors for the OWASP Foundation. I was there, was that 2009-ish was the last time I was there. So it's been a little bit, but I'm back, which is pretty cool. So that's my OWASP side of my life, my fingers in many pies. One of the other pies is I'm a distinguished engineer for NoName Security. I help them with their product to make sure it's useful and friendly for application security teams, as well as help get the word out about API security issues. And I'm a founder of a company called 10 Security that is primarily focused on OWASP project called DefectDojo.
Super cool, man. So I think you and I in 2009, we were in Portugal or Spain or somewhere in Western Europe, absolutely making a mess of some poor hotel and doing all kinds of fun stuff. I think we were at University of Algarve teaching.
Yeah. We did it. We did a class there. We talked in front of a class there. And then we also got in the local media. They brought over a news crew. Yeah. And I showed them how we could pop a box.
Yeah. And by the way, all those techniques still work in 2022.
Yeah. Sadly, that is not dated information.
I love it, man. So we'll come back around to the OWASP thing, which is really kind of, one of the larger things to talk about today, but tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing with DefectDojo and then, some of your other projects, because DefectDojo is really cool. I got to dig into this a little bit.
Yeah. DefectDojo's been an amazing thing. Quick, Reader's Digest history, 8-9 years ago, Rackspace. I'm working at Rackspace Cloud for the product team. I'm running the product team, and we have every technology known to man running underneath the roof of Rackspace. And that means a lot of different tools, tons of different tools, because I have this weird Ruby thing, and I only have this one tool that can look at Ruby, but this other Python thing, and I have these two other tools that do Python. And then that's just on the static side, and then a dynamic side, and API testing, and tool, tons of tools. And it was just getting crazy. And my original terrible idea, honestly, was to write a parser that would parse every tool output into a report. But then I just have 15 reports, and that's not much better. So we kind of realized that was a dumb path to go down, and we dropped that idea and came up with what became DefectDojo. The idea being is we can take, and currently DefectDojo supports over 150 different security tools. So we can import in the results from over 150 different security tools, normalize them, dedupe them, mark false positives, and then you have one sort of data model to push out to various stakeholders, right? That could be, if you have, and it's actually working, if you have RSA Archer, right? I can push out to your GRC teams with RSA Archer. If you have Jira, I can push bugs into Jira for the dev teams. I can do metrics, but I can do metrics across all those tools because I've normalized it, right? Which is hugely valuable. That project has exploded. I haven't looked in a while, but we're up to 50 million downloads on Docker Hub, which is cool. Just mind-blowing. Yeah, 200 some odd contributors, 2.1 thousand stars. I mean, it's blown up. It's been a fun ride. But it's solving a lot of problems for people, which makes me happy.
Well, and it's funny you say that too, right? Because for the longest time before I started, working with Secure IT 360, I was a consumer of the output of those tools in an enterprise environment. So I worked for big banks, and we had the same kind of problem. I was unaware of DefectDojo at the time. It might have been when DefectDojo was a lot younger, and we were doing exactly like you described. We were writing parsers. We were taking it and manually dumping it into like a CSV that could be consumed by bug tracking systems. And it was always a mess, So to hear that you guys have solved that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, nobody likes doing that grunt work, period. And from a management perspective, I mean, I ran a team, like having my people spend hours pushing around data, copy paste, or
Mhm.
junk like that's what computers are great at. Like, let's make the computer do the stuff it's great at and let the humans be clever and interesting and have fun. And that's kind of what DefectDojo got us.
I love it. I love it. So tell me a little bit about your API security platform over at NoName Security.
Yeah. So NoName Security has an API security platform. It handles sort of the three major areas of API security. So the first one is what I like to call posture management, right? This is getting an inventory of all your APIs, and understanding the data that's going into and out of them, right? So it's not particularly sexy, but it's really freaking important if you want to
Mhm.
understand the risk that's presented by your APIs. And NoName did some interesting research. The average company has 15,000 APIs. And if you have over 10K employees, your average is 25,000 APIs.
Wow.
Holy cow. Well, I
That's a
mean,
lot.
it became the way. Like, I have microservices. Guess what? I have zillions of APIs, right? Yeah, I have
Yeah.
Kubernetes. I have APIs. I have cloud. I have APIs. Like,
Yeah.
APIs are everywhere.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Absolutely. And APIs have always presented this kind of unique challenge because while they are technically, I guess, a web application, they're in this fringe area that makes them hard to address from a security perspective. And it's hard to even, to your point, to even know where they are and what you have. And then once you even know that they do, like, what do you test against? It's
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. From a conversation with a lot of different people, I've come to realize that it's also sort of a visible, the layer of visibility issue, right? From we get into the upper levels of management, they understand we have a product that does a thing and we sell it.
Mhm.
But that product is actually composed of, say, a backend API, a mobile front end, and a web single page app that consumes that API. Well, you really have three things that make up a product, right? And so it gets
Yep.
really interesting because if I only speak at management at a product level, I may never even hear about the API. It's
Sure.
there. It's one of the, it's like talking about the foundation of your house. You talk about your house, not the foundation. But, if the foundation goes bad, it's bad for the house.
Yeah. Makes perfect sense, man.
Yeah, and then the other two areas we cover is runtime. So we'll monitor and keep track of attacks or any kind of active, nefarious behavior with your APIs. We're out of band. We do ML to understand what normal is and tell you what unnormal is. And I don't know if you've heard the expression that ML is written in either R or Python, generally speaking,
Mhm.
and AI is written in PowerPoint.
I have not heard
Right?
that expression, but I like it because
It's kind of true. Like, I don't want to tell you we have magic fairy dust, but we just understand patterns, right, with
yeah,
ML and can tell you when this is weird. Like, why, when all the other requests look like this one request looks really freaking weird. You
yeah.
should go check it out, right? That's what ML will give you.
We
And
we
then the
find those a lot in pen testing too. When we pen test APIs, is we'll hit a certain endpoint and the response time quadruples, right? And they're like, I don't understand what's going on. Those are the kind of things. Like, I don't know if that's a security problem, right? But somebody needs to look into that.
Yeah, well, and I've done a lot of testing of APIs and done things like put a script tag in for a phone number and it 200s, and you're
Yeah.
like,
Like,
I know it's not
excuse me.
it's not technically vulnerable, but am I filling your database full of trash data that is actually kind of quasi exploit data that you will then feed on to some other subsequent system that it will show up? Right, those things
Mhm.
happen,
Sure, they do.
and it makes it really interesting. And then the final area we cover is testing. So ideally, we'd wire into your CI/CD, give you the ability to run tests before things go to prod, and hopefully, if you do it that way in the correct way, you're not pushing badness to prod without at least knowing about it. Hopefully,
Right.
you're fixing it too.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So and really, you and I were kind of talking before the show, all of that stuff needs to happen. My world being offensive security, I'm focused on penetration testing. Penetration testing is not an excuse not to do all of those things. In fact, I would even argue, not trying to run myself out of business here, but I would even argue that the things that you're doing, if we were to rank them on levels of importance, are more important. because they're a more comprehensive, you have a better perspective of the application, in the origin of the flaws. And so, you still have to do pen testing, right? Because everybody says you have to, and it's good. You really need to be doing all the things Matt's talking about right now.
Well, and they are very important, and they're continuous, which is a big differentiator.
Yep.
But the other thing that I think is, well, a value of pen testing that is actually enhanced by having some kind of programmatic thing in place, like a API security platform or even just a decent AppSec program, is how do I know all those things that I've done, all those controls are working right? That's what pen testing does.
Exactly.
I used to joke that I used to, like, my goal running an AppSec team was to make the pen testers' jobs as hard as possible. And I loved it. Let's make them really work. Because honestly, too, as a pen tester, the more interesting, esoteric, crazy stuff I found is way more fun than the SSL Cypher Suite is weak.
Right.
Again, right? Who cares? It's not exciting.
Yeah, agreed. And to your point, somebody asked me, this has been a year or two ago, what a ideal pen test would look like. Like, what is my favorite kind of pen test? And the unpopular but true opinion is zero findings, right? You should not be relying on me as a pen tester to discover flaws in your environment. I should be validating controls, like you just said. Those are very different goals. Those are very different processes. And the outcome of those two different things, just have different paths.
Yeah, and I've done pen test. I don't know how many pen tests I've done, hundreds of them. And the one that is stuck in my mind, well, there's several that stick in my mind for some kind of tragic badness, honestly, but the one that sticks in my mind in a positive way was this one particular pen test of a SaaS provider that knew they had an unsophisticated user base. And, standard operating procedure for a web app test, I'm brute forcing the login, I'm trying to do password spraying, I'm doing those kind of things, right? Let me see if I can bust an account and get in. And I couldn't get anywhere. I left a fuzzer running overnight, right? And I got nothing. And the more I dug into it, I realized that they actually had an escalating timeout based on the number of guesses per user. And they were even smart enough to catch it if you try to do horizontal versus horizontal versus vertical fuzzing, right? Where I'm neither switching username and keeping the password the same or switching password and changing username. But they handled it both ways. And Beautiful. It was the one and only time I actually wrote a finding in a pen test. It was like, OMG, I love what you did. This is so cool.
Yeah.
I talked to the client and I was like, I just got to tell you, this is fantastic. You did some awesome engineering here. And he said, well, we knew our users weren't particularly sophisticated and they were going to forget their passwords, but we couldn't weaken it to let attackers in. So the middle ground was make it really slow for attackers. And they did a great job.
That's fantastic. I've actually run into similar stuff like that before, but I will tell you we're wrapping up, the calendar year soon. So we're doing analysis on the body of findings in a pen test category basis, right? So what's the number one finding for external pen test? Suite 32. What's the number one finding for, a web app pen test? Believe it or not, it is lack of velocity defenses. That is our number one finding this year so far, right? There's still more analysis to be done, but their inability to defend themselves against velocity tests. Now, a velocity test could be incrementing account numbers, or it could be, a@gmail.com, incrementing to try to find you. There's any number of things, but defending against that's a challenge. And it's really cool that they figured out how to do that.
Yeah, anti-automation stuff has been, and that's where some of my more fun pen test findings have been. There was another one that I did years ago where to reset your account, you had to go through some biographical data, birth date, address, home address, birth date, and
I already know where you're going with this, and it's exciting.
Yeah, the last 4 of your SSN, right? So, okay, I know the person who hired me, and I knew they used this system. So I went and poked around in social media, and I found people wishing them happy birthday. So I had a 2 or 3 day window of probably when their birthday was. So, okay, cool. And I went to the local property tax, and at least in Texas, you can look up people's property taxes. So I found their name, and now I have their address, their home address, because they pay property tax against it. And so I just needed the last 4 of the SSN. Well, I just fuzzed it. Yeah. I mean, why not? It's a fair number of
less than
guesses,
1,000,
but
right?
Yeah, but I mean, That's something a computer can do without even breaking a sweat. And they had zero anti-automation. They would let me guess all 4 digits of the SSN, and I eventually was able to get in and log in.
I guess it would be 10,000.
10,000, yeah.
It would be 10,000.
I mean, but it's still, for a computer, that's nothing.
Minutes.
Yeah. So, and they had zero anti-automation, and my finding to them was like, this is, the concept around this, give me some biographical data is great, but you have to have something that trips on the 4th or 5th or 6th time, because people aren't going to mistype the last 4 of their SSN more than 2-3 times. I mean, come on.
Right. Yep. I agree. That's so good.
Will.
Oh yeah. and that's, that's a big part of both API and web app pen testing is, we find something we think we can mess with and we just beat the snot out of it until it either breaks or we figure it out. So, the other fun one with APIs for me has been, I like to think of them as like what I would call data testing and structural testing. So data testing is like fuzzing, right? You put crazy data in and see what happens. But to me, the more fun one, and the one you have to do much more manually, because like QA and normal tools like Postman and stuff won't let you do this, but do crazy structures, right? I had one where I took out an API and I just injected 32 meg of space in between 2 XML tags, right? Stupid request. It's syntactically valid. It's just dumb. Right.
Or repeat a data element like 5 times. See what happens, right? Like it can be really interesting, but you almost have to manually craft those requests, though, because normal tools like Postman and stuff will want to, make it conform to be correct. Well, I want to try what incorrect does. And man, I've had some interesting findings from that.
That's super cool. I love that. Yeah, we've had some issues with that also, where, like, for example, if you remove, if you want to change an element of some data set, but you remove the ID that it's queuing off of, just make it blank, it'll change all the elements of the data set. Right. And so the logic that was written would translate, white space. And I think it was introduced in a search feature where if you search for nothing, it would give you everything. Well, that translated directly to the application of changes in elements of the data. And we were able to just make an entire data set of hi in every column across the entire thing, because we had permission to write to one. And it was, like you said, that those are interesting behaviors that we find with APIs.
Yeah, those are fun. Those are really fun. And it's there's a lot of interesting problems around APIs because they're made to go fast. They're made to be programmatically accessible, right? That's the nature of the beast. But that also means from an attacker, I can do really crazy things fast, right? Yeah. And the other thing is, I think a lot of developers, and this is not to throw them under the bus, I would probably do this as a way to increase my throughput. But they'll use frameworks that do some automagical things, right? Take in a request in JSON, turn it into a SQL query, and dump it to the database automatically, right? Well, this is where mass assignment happens, right? Where I can add a couple new things and change rows I shouldn't be changing in the database by guessing at what those rows would be, right? Yep. Boom. Or excessive data exposure, right? I'm going to take a response back from the database. And I mean, I don't know how many times, well, I'm a mean person. I actually would grep my fellow code people, or the people that coded with me. I would grep for select star and then yell at them. I'm like, give me the explicit column names you need. You don't need star.
Right.
You need 3 columns. Like, don't ask for 50. Like, just from a performance, perspective.
Yeah.
But they take the select star output, JSONify it, and ship it to a client. And it's our mobile client. So if I send some extra data, they'll just ignore it, right? Like, yes, but if I'm an attacker, I will have fun because you just did excessive data exposure by sending me all the things, right? And I get it. Like, it's way faster to program that way, and it's way easier, and you can be way more productive, but you're also way more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just did, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, mobile pen testing. And so our mobile pen tester was talking about similar type stuff where it's like, that API presents interesting challenges because I'm going to retrieve that data and I'm going to put it in an untrusted place, right? I'm going to put it in someone's pocket that I don't know, and I'm going to hope they don't mess with it. And so, but like you're right, the perception, kind of the mental headspace that a lot of developers are in is, this is my app, this is my data, and everything that's contained within this is mine, and nobody can mess with it. And the reality is both of those things have some pretty heavy exposures.
Yeah, it goes back to that layers of visibility thing, right? Where I think of my product as the mobile app plus the API that powers it, but they're really two separate code bases with two groups of different developers with two different motivations, probably in two different languages, right? I mean, it's a very different place. And if that contract, more or less, of the API between the API and the mobile client, let's say, isn't really explicit, all kinds of room for fun for attackers, not
Right.
for the people who are running that product.
Right. It's not fun for them.
It's a perspective thing.
That's why I love our job, though, is, we get to, somebody builds this beautifully, crafted machine. It's well thought out and it's shiny, and we just start stabbing it with screwdrivers to see what happens. And, and when it messes up, we come back to them with a pile of parts, and we're like, hey guys, so this thing happened.
Wait, it's almost like pulling a bottom wooden thing off a Jenga tower, right? And they're like,
right,
what happens if I pull this off? Wham! Oh, that's what happens. Yeah. You might want to glue that in place. Just saying.
So speaking of gluing stuff in place, I've been involved with OWASP almost as long as you have. I think you might have actually been one of the people to drag me in, if I recall correctly, in like 2007.
Yep.
Because I want to say that started when I reached out to you or went to a conference with you or something, and we kind of hit things off. And
you and I bumped into each other very early. I can't remember what OWASP conference it was, but it was 2007, I want to say. But yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. And so, I was immediately fascinated with OWASP because my origins in AppSec came from, I was a security engineer at a bank, and they were like, hey, we have a banking app, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, how do we know if it's secure? And I was like, I don't know. And so I found OWASP, and I started learning and educating myself and started to seek it out. But I said all of that to kind of introduce OWASP as this huge body of knowledge, and all of these projects and all of this stuff that you guys are contributing to the community. And so can you tell me a little bit about, I know what OWASP is. I'm pretty sure most people do, but let's talk about OWASP, what you're doing there, and like what's exciting. And then I know you guys have a podcast too. We want to mention that as well. So
yeah, so OWASP, OWASP is many things. It's a global community of people who care about AppSec. And in a very broad definition of application security, DevSecOps, it falls in there, container security falls in there, API security, mobile security. It's basically software. Right? If there's anything to do with software development and security, that's kind of where OWASP plays. And I think one of the beauties of OWASP is, because it has such a large global reach, you'll find these people that are just fascinated by a particular technology, and they will go, down to the atomic level of understanding this particular tech stack. And then they share what they've learned, right? If you look at the OWASP cheat sheet series, that's a whole bunch of people who are super specialized in a narrow field of AppSec who share that knowledge so that everybody can get smarter about it. And you don't have to spend the months, weeks, years getting up to your eyeballs in whatever tech it is, right? Like I noticed recently the OWASP top 10, Kubernetes top 10 just came out. And I know the person who did it, Jim Mesta, he super knows Kubernetes. He's been doing it since like a 0 point something release of Kubernetes. God bless that poor guy, but he had a fun ride. But here's somebody who's been dealing with Kubernetes on a day-to-day operational basis for years, who's seen enough, sort of security mistakes and misconfigurations and whatever else is going to happen in your Kubernetes to be able to say, look, if I could fix 10 things about any Kubernetes, this is where I would start. That's hugely valuable.
Yeah.
Right. And the cheat sheet series is just a ton. I don't remember how many there is now, 60, 70. I can't remember cheat sheets now that like, hey, somebody reported cross-site scripting to you. You're a developer. It's your third week at the job. You're not even sure what cross-site scripting is. How do I fix it? Go read the cheat sheet, right? You take 15 minutes to read the cheat sheet. You'll get an idea of the problem and how to fix it, and done, right? That kind of super pragmatic advice is so useful. And then,
Yeah, and I love it, man. We use it every day here, every day.
yeah, so it's so broad. I mean, you have the OWASP testing guide, which is a hugely valuable resource. The
Is
mobile,
Mateo still running that?
I think he is, yes. Although I think he's, well, there's a lot of chefs in that kitchen right now, which is good.
Sure. Yeah,
But he
I'm one
is.
of those. So I actually contributed to it the last two versions, because it's just an awesome resource, and I could
It
not,
is.
you know.
Well, and even for like tangential things, like I need to test for X. Well, go read the testing guide section on it, and they're going to recommend some tools. Like,
Yep.
right, I mean, that's how you learned. Honestly, that's how I learned. I got the V3 of the testing guide, and I read through it and tried all the stuff that was in it until I knew what the heck I was doing. I mean, that's kind of what you do,
Yep.
right?
That's
And then,
awesome.
I mean, like, talk about timely, the dependency track and dependency check, right? The whole SBOM thing, right? Those are two projects that deal directly with the software bill of materials. And in fact, the lead for dependency track is the person who came up with the Cyclone DX standard as part of his dependency track work. So yeah, I mean, these are people that are really moving the needle in a software space. And most importantly, they're willing to share. Like, that's
Love
what's
it,
really
man.
cool.
And you know, just everybody that's involved there, just the community has got such a cool sense of inviting people in and making them part of the community. You know, I say that as a former outsider of a guy who was like, man, I really want to learn more about this AppSec thing. Everybody's like, dude, come sit down with us. Let's go grab a drink. Let's go learn about stuff. And you know, if I had $1 for every OWASP contributor that I reached out to and who just called me and was like, hey man, what do you need?
Yeah.
And these are all really busy, really, you know, smart people that will take time out of their lives to contribute. And that's just like the coolest thing ever.
Oh, it's hugely valuable. I mean, I can't. Yeah, I've learned so much from that community, and hopefully given some back as well, because it it was funny. I was teaching a web app pen testing class years ago, and one of my students said, "Well, aren't you worried that if you teach people how to do web app pen testing, you're going to put yourself out of a job?" And I was like, "Oh, well, that is so cute." No, like, there's
No.
so many apps out there, and so few people that can test them. Like, I am not worried. I could train, a room full of people every week for a year, and we'd still have a shortfall in people that have the skill set, to come out and do this. And
We're
it's
booking 10 weeks out for web app pen testing right now. That's how
yeah,
busy we are. And we got 2 web app pen testers. So, you know, so we're doing 20 weeks of work before we can look at the next one.
yeah. And when I was doing that as a consultant, yeah, I was continually booked, at least one, if not two a week,
Yeah.
and sometimes three a week, which was really
Oof.
awful.
I don't like sleep either, Matt.
Yeah. Hey man, coffee, and like no sleep. It's amazing. They make
Yeah.
you gray before you should. That was when I had brown hair.
What happened, man?
Yeah, I did 3
Pen testing.
consecutive gigs at the same time.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
So no, and I mean, you're just kind of echoing exactly my experience with OWASP and how amazing they are. And so, you know, now you're on the board, and so you're going to get to influence the direction of the organization, which is awesome to have somebody like you on board.
I hope so. That my goal kind of is to what was that? I just was listening to a completely unrelated, well, not unrelated. It was a Go programming talk from GopherCon UK, actually. But this fellow who was doing the talk was talking about complex systems and how complex systems hurt your ability to innovate, right? That was the essence of this talk he was giving.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I'm just on the board now, and I think some of our systems are complex and a little too Rube Goldbergy, and they don't give the participants the ability to be as agile as they'd like to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to loosen up the reins a bit, to let the people who are contributing to OWASP have fewer roadblocks. I mean, that's kind of my thing. And I've been a project leader since 2008, I guess, was my first project.
Yeah.
And so I get it. Like, and I'm currently co-running a chapter with a local friend that's not going so great, honestly. I live in a small town in Texas, and it's hard to get people to come up here.
Sure.
Even if we have
Sure.
it at a nice beer garden, like, you'd hope people would show up for that, but I can't. Our attendance numbers aren't amazing. So I felt
Yeah.
the pain of a lot of the different parts of OWASP, but I'm hoping to find ways to make it so that the interactions with the foundation are as smooth and simple as possible.
Love it,
and
man.
try to keep things, because I mean, like you talked about feedback earlier, right? And reaching out to project leaders, and I'll tell you why they responded to you. My first project, the OWASP Live CD, that
WTE, I remember that.
Yeah, that thing in 2009 got downloaded 300,000 times. I probably got 12 emails about it.
Right.
and I know it wasn't perfect. So like those feedback loops are so valuable, that when you get them, it is highly valuable. And I want to make sure that when the foundation is getting feedback from the community, we don't lose those valuable bits of feedback, because that's just going to make OWASP better.
Agreed, 100%. And I know one of your projects too is the OWASP podcast. Yes. So I want to get some visibility on that too before we wrap up today.
Yeah. It's on SoundCloud. If you just Google OWASP podcast, you can find it. It's also on iTunes and Apple Podcasts and all the places, whatever it's syndicated. But I took over from Mark Miller, who was running the podcast for years and doing a fantastic job. And my goal with that is to have a once a month conversation with somebody interesting in the space. And I try to make it like a hall track at a conference. Like one of the things I like about physical conferences was, I mean, I loved going to the talks, but then you also just bump into people at lunch or in the hall and like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I've got this weird SaaS problem I'm having. And you get to talk and shop and you're like, oh, that is a cool idea. That's great. So I want to try to bubble those ideas out into a much more, broader than just two people talking in a hall.
Sure. No, I love that. That's fantastic, man. So tell me so you mentioned how to get to the OWASP podcast. If somebody wants to reach out to you directly, whether it be for DefectDojo, NoName, OWASP, what's the best way to get a hold of you right now?
I'm on LinkedIn. That certainly works. Although there's a lot of like vendor people bugging me on LinkedIn these days. God help them. They should realize that I don't really want to buy their thingy. But LinkedIn isn't bad. You can certainly hit me up on Twitter, although Twitter looks like it wants to burn down now. So it's Matt_Tesauro at Twitter. I'm contemplating moving over to Mastodon, but I haven't done that yet. I'm kind of waiting to see how burned down Twitter gets. And what the whole Musk conversion.
I'm watching it with eager intent. I'm just curious more than anything else.
It's going to be really interesting. But then just matt.tesauro at owasp.org, right? You can hit me up there. I've had that email address since 2008. I'm a lifetime member, so it shouldn't go away anytime soon. And so, hit me up there and I'm happy to help whoever, whenever, however, as I have time.
Yeah. And I can tell you from experience, folks, if you need to get a hold of Matt, he's responsive and really kind of, I think one of the most visible people in the API security and AppSec space, at least from my chair. So really happy to have you on board, man, and really enjoy talking to you. Anything you want to close out with before we bail?
Just if you like OWASP, consider becoming a member. I have to say that contractually now that I'm on the board. And if you work for a company that uses OWASP stuff, consider becoming a corporate sponsor. If you go to the membership page on owasp.org, there's all the information you need to do that. But it's a charity, and we survive by people donating money and hosting conferences. So it's nice when people donate.
Good, excellent. Well, folks, that's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed it, go find Matt and give him a thumbs up on LinkedIn or wherever you can find him, OWASP podcast, all that good stuff. And obviously share with your peers if you had a good time today. Otherwise, we will see you next Wednesday.